Hello and welcome. Today I'd like to tell you the story about somewhere that's very close to my heart but that I don't normally get to talk about. It's somewhere that long before Harrogate emerged as a thriving spa town and tourist destination, long before it was known as Harrogate, was one of the most important locations in the north of England, serving as a military stronghold to kings, as a royal residence to queens and princes, and to this day sits inside a bustling community that attracts thousands of visitors every year to enjoy its splendours. Welcome to Knaresborough Castle. Well, not really. Unfortunately, due to the lockdown that we're in at the moment, we're unable to get to Knaresborough Castle to film this video. However, hopefully with a sprinkling of imagination and a few rather wonderful images, we can transport ourselves back and understand the fascinating story behind this unique setting. I do hope that you enjoy. Based on Neolithic remains, we know that there have been people living in and around the Knaresborough area for the last 11,500 years, since the end of the Younger Dryas period, when the last glaciers retreated from this area. Those same glaciers are believed to be responsible for carving the stunning gorge which the River Nid sits within inside. By the 4th century, the Romans had left this area, and Anglo-Saxon tribes began moving in. They set up rudimentary fortifications on the cliffs overlooking the Nid Gorge. Clearly, they understood the significance of this area and its strategic location. By 1066, a young Norman duke by the name of William contested the claims of Harold Godwinson to the English throne. He raised an army, crossed the Channel, and defeated Godwinson at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. Shooting up north, the only real resistance he faced was when he got to Yorkshire. We managed to hold them off in rebellion for 3 whole years, till eventually he conquered most of England. To stop any future uprisings, he ordered his nobles to commit what's known as the Harrying of the North. Everything from the River Humber up to the southern borders of Scotland was systematically wiped out. This left huge swathes of land open, which he then divided up into parcels and granted to his nobles and barons that assisted him with his successful invasion. However, to further solidify his stronghold on the north of England, he commissioned a series of huge stronghold castles, including this one here at Knaresborough. Don't know why I'm doing that. We don't have the CGI budget to put it there, but I'll show you a picture. The castle itself was a commanding fortress, protected on its north and west sides by the 120-foot drop down into the Nid Gorge, and on its south and east side by deep ditches and moats, not to mention the walls themselves being 40 foot high and in some places 5 meters thick. This really was an imposing obstacle to any would-be invader. Within the castle's walls could be found a bustling community, thriving not only on trade but also manufacture. When the Normans came across, they brought with them their crossbows that were used to devastating effect at the Battle of Hastings. Although the crossbow was originally invented in China around 3,000 years ago, it seems to have dropped off in popularity as the projectile weapon of choice during the Dark Ages, but was brought back by the Normans with a vengeance, and by the 12th and 13th centuries they could be found throughout England. One of the main reasons for this is the fact that the castle at Knaresborough was a munitions centre, specifically making the bolts or quarrels that are fired from the crossbows themselves. It was during the 13th century that the next best modern cultural reference to propel our story forward takes place, and that is the one of William Wallace. Immortalised in the Academy Award-winning movie Braveheart, this is a stunning piece of cinematography and one of my personal favourite movies. Unfortunately though, as a historical reference, it just doesn't cut the mustard. It's littered with historical inaccuracies, incorrect dates and made-up locations. In the movie we see William and his Scots sack the city of York, a relative stone's throw away from where we are here. But in reality, they never made it much further down than Carlisle, a good 100 miles to our north. However, this isn't to say that the threat of invasion from the Scots wasn't a real possibility, and Edward I, depicted in the movie as the cruel Edward Longshanks, spent vast sums of money improving the defences here at the castle in Knaresborough in case of an invasion. And this, it would seem, was not untimely, as after the deaths of both Wallace and Longshanks, Edward I's son, Edward II, had taken the throne and was facing problems of his own. Edward II was a curious character to say the least, and his reign was shrouded in controversy. This came to a head in 1317 when the Earl of Lancaster launched a rebellion against the king and captured Knaresborough Castle. Just 3 months later, however, a general loyal to Edward II took the castle back. However, just a year after that, the Scots finally made it this far down south and sacked the town of Knaresborough, burning most of it to the ground. Luckily, the castle's defences stayed strong and managed to save most of the town's people. However, by the time that Edward II's son, Edward III, took the throne, Knaresborough Castle was starting to outgrow its function as a military stronghold and was becoming more of a royal residence. Edward III was one of Britain's longest-serving rulers, at 50 years on the throne. His Queen Philippa was well loved throughout the island, despite the fact she was the daughter of a French nobleman. She was seen as a calming influence on the sometimes hot-headed king. For instance, just a year after taking the throne, he launched into the 100 Years' War, which inevitably led to an English defeat and the loss of most of its lands in France. Most summers, Queen Philippa would retire to Knaresborough, bringing with her children, Edward the Black Prince, John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, and Edmund Langley, the Duke of York. Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky, so I hope you're writing this down for the test at the end. But, in short, Edward the Black Prince was supposed to inherit the throne. However, his father, Edward III, had been campaigning in France, in which he subsequently died. Now, at this point, the lineage should have passed across to the Duke of Lancaster. However, just a year later, Edward III did pass away as well, leaving the crown not to the Duke of Lancaster, but to the Black Prince's son, the 10-year-old Richard II. This understandably frustrated his two uncles, and after many years of squabbling and bickering, Richard II ended up banishing the Lancaster line. However, just a few years later, they returned with a vengeance and launched the Lancaster Rebellion, in which they defeated Richard II in battle. After the battle, Richard II handed himself in, only to be imprisoned and ultimately had his head chopped off. Now, if this all starting to sound a little bit familiar and not in the boring history lesson kind of way, then that's because it was the direct inspiration for George R.R. Martin's A Game of Thrones. In HBO's 8-season epic, we see the two main protagonists, the House of Stark and the House of Lannister, battle it out for the Iron Throne. In reality, over 25 years of betrayal, broken promises and battle, we see the House of York take on the House of Lancaster for the right to rule England. The Wars of the Roses would end after 4 separate kings sat on the throne when Henry VII, descendant of the first Duke of Lancaster, married the daughter of Edward IV, descendant of the first Duke of York, thus finally uniting the Red Rose of Lancashire and the White Rose of Yorkshire to form the Tudor Rose. Henry VII's son Henry VIII is never known to have visited Knaresborough Castle, but considering he was such a keen sportsman and the fact that he took personal pride in all of the castles under his possession, it's not unlikely that he visited the royal hunting forests at Knaresborough at some point. However, the next time that real money was spent on the castle was by Sir Henry Slingsby in 1600, when he improved the courthouse and the judicial centre at the heart of the castle. It was also Sir Henry Slingsby that at the start of the Civil War declared himself as a royalist and supporter of King Charles I. He moved his own personal garrison in to protect the castle from the parliamentary forces. However, it was just 10 miles away that the Battle of Marston Moor took place, one of the bloodiest days in British military history, which cost the lives of thousands of Englishmen. After King Charles's defeat, the garrison here at Knaresborough Castle came under attack from parliamentary forces, who set themselves up on the opposite side of the river and bombarded the castle with cannon fire for 6 weeks. Eventually, a stray cannonball caught a weak point in the wall's defences, causing it to cascade down the side of the Nid Gorge and into the river. After this, the handful of men that were still left to defend the castle surrendered. Oliver Cromwell feared that the castle may well be taken back by royalist forces at some point, so ordered it to be dismantled. The locals managed to convince him to keep the King's Tower to be used as a prison, as well as the newly built judicial centre, but everything else was dismantled. In fact, many of the buildings within Knaresborough today have been built using this castle's stone. And if the name Slingsby sounds familiar, that could have something to do with Sir Henry's uncle, Mr. William Slingsby, who is the inspiration behind the Spirit of Harrogate's Slingsby Gin. In 1571, William was strolling through the forest in the castle grounds when he discovered naturally occurring waters emerging at the surface. He asked his friend Dr. Bright, who's the personal doctor to Queen Elizabeth I, to examine these waters, and when he did, deemed them to have medicinal benefits, encouraging his friends and colleagues to travel in here to sample the waters or take the cure, as it was becoming known, for all sorts of medical ailments and illnesses. By the 19th century, gentry from around the world and the royal families of Europe were flocking into the greater royal hunting forest of Knaresborough to sample its waters, engage in its thriving social scene, and in a very Victorian way, let loose. Today, Knaresborough Castle is open 365 days a year and is completely free. Check out the Harrogate Borough Council website in the description below to find out when they have their special events and when you can take their guided tours, where experts will lead you through their sally ports and down into the castle's dungeons. Plus, they're the ones that really know what they're talking about, rather than just being a wally in a waistcoat. I hope that this thing all blows over in the near future, at least before the summer is out. And if it is, I implore you to visit Knaresborough. It's easily one of the prettiest places in the world, has a great hospitality scene and a history dating back a millennia. Thank you so much to my beautiful fiancée Catherine on the camera, the Harrogate Borough Council, all the team at Harrogate Museums, the Royal Hall, and especially the Harrogate Library. Keep safe, have a great day, and hopefully see you soon. I think it's time for one of those. There you go, darling.
Aw, cheers.
Cheers.